What if I told you that time itself could betray you, that you could walk into the mountains as a young man and emerge decades older? While the world around you had barely changed, this is the impossible story of Robert Chen, a 45-year-old geology professor, and his nephew, Kevin Chen, just 19 years old, who vanished into the remote peaks of the Cascade Mountains in Washington state in 2019. When they were finally found 4 years later in 2023, something had happened that defied every law of physics and challenged everything we thought we knew about the nature of time itself. Robert Chen had always been fascinated by the mysteries hidden within the Earth's geological formations. As a professor at the University of Washington, he had spent over 20 years studying the unique mineral compositions and geological anomalies found throughout the Pacific Northwest. His specialty was investigating areas where standard geological models failed to explain the observed phenomena, places where the normal rules seemed somehow different. Kevin Chen, Robert's nephew, was a sophomore studying physics at MIT, home for summer break in June 2019. The young man had inherited his uncle's passion for scientific mysteries and had been eagerly anticipating their planned expedition to investigate what Robert called temporal anomalies in the remote Cascade Wilderness. These were areas where hikers had reported strange experiences, watches stopping, compasses spinning wildly, and an unsettling feeling that time itself moved differently. The expedition was planned as a week-long research trip to an area known locally as the Lost Valley, a remote section of the Cascades that had been the subject of numerous unexplained disappearances over the past century. The valley was accessible only by a treacherous hiking trail that wound through dense forest and across unstable rock formations. Most hikers avoided the area entirely, but Robert had obtained special permits from the Forest Service to conduct his research there. On the morning of June 15th, 2019, Robert and Kevin set out from the Cascade River Road trailhead, their backpacks loaded with sophisticated geological equipment, GPS devices, and enough supplies for 10 days in the wilderness. Robert carried spectrometers and magnetic field detectors, while Kevin brought along atomic clocks and quantum measurement devices he had borrowed from MIT's physics department. They were both excited about the possibility of documenting genuine temporal anomalies for the first time in scientific history. The last confirmed contact with the uncle and nephew came at 3:47 p.m. on June 17th, when Robert sent a satellite message to his wife, Dr. Sarah Chen, reporting that they had reached the Lost Valley and were beginning their initial measurements. The message was brief but enthusiastic. Incredible readings here, magnetic fields off the charts, Kevin's atomic clocks showing impossible variations. We'll send full data tomorrow. This could change everything. That message would be the last anyone heard from Robert and Kevin Chen for the next 4 years. When the pair failed to check in the following day, Sarah immediately contacted the authorities. She knew her husband well enough to understand that he would never miss a scheduled communication, especially when conducting research in such a remote and dangerous area. The Whatcom County Sheriff's Department launched a search and rescue operation within hours of receiving her call. The initial search was hampered by severe weather that moved into the area just days after Robert and Kevin's disappearance. Heavy rains and fog made helicopter searches impossible, and ground teams struggled to navigate the treacherous terrain of the Lost Valley. When the weather finally cleared after a week, search teams found the uncle and nephew's base camp exactly where Robert's GPS coordinates had indicated it would be. The campsite was undisturbed and perfectly organized, as if Robert and Kevin had simply stepped away for a short hike and planned to return momentarily. Their tent was properly secured, their food was still sealed in bear-proof containers, and their backup communication equipment was functioning normally, most puzzling of all. Their emergency beacon was still active and transmitting their location, but there was no sign of the two men anywhere in the vicinity. Search and Rescue Coordinator Captain Maria Rodriguez had never encountered anything like it in her 15 years of leading mountain rescue operations. We found their camp. We found their equipment. We even found the exact spot where they had been conducting their experiments, she explained to reporters. But Robert and Kevin Chen had simply vanished without a trace. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of an accident, and no trail to follow. It was as if they had just evaporated. The search continued for 6 weeks, involving hundreds of volunteers, multiple helicopter crews, and specialized mountain rescue teams from across the Pacific Northwest. Every cave, ravine, and hidden valley within a 50-mile radius was thoroughly searched. Thermal imaging cameras detected no human heat signatures, and cadaver dogs found no scent trails leading away from the campsite. Dr. James Mitchell, a physicist colleague of Robert's from the University of Washington, joined the search effort and was particularly intrigued by the equipment that had been left behind at the campsite. Robert's geological instruments were still recording data, and the readings they showed were unlike anything Dr. Mitchell had ever seen. Magnetic field fluctuations were occurring in patterns that seemed to defy known physics, and the atomic clocks Kevin had brought were displaying temporal measurements that appeared to be completely impossible. The instruments were recording magnetic field variations that shouldn't exist in nature, Dr. Mitchell later explained, and Kevin's atomic clocks were showing time dilation effects that would require gravitational fields thousands of times stronger than anything found on Earth. Either the equipment was malfunctioning, or something truly extraordinary was happening in that valley. As the weeks turned into months without any trace of Robert and Kevin, the official search was gradually scaled back and eventually suspended. The case was reclassified as a missing persons investigation, but with no leads and no evidence of foul play. There was little more that law enforcement could do. The Lost Valley returned to its usual state of remote isolation, and the mystery of the missing uncle and nephew became another unsolved disappearance in the long history of the Cascade Mountains. Sarah Chen refused to give up hope. She organized private search parties, hired professional trackers, and even consulted with psychics and paranormal investigators who claimed to have experience with unexplained disappearances. She spent her life savings on aerial surveys and ground-penetrating radar studies of the Lost Valley, convinced that her husband and nephew were still alive somewhere and that she would eventually find them. The case attracted the attention of researchers studying anomalous phenomena, and the Lost Valley became a destination for investigators of paranormal activity. Some theorized that Robert and Kevin had encountered some kind of dimensional portal or time distortion field. Others suggested they had been abducted by extraterrestrial beings or had fallen victim to some unknown natural phenomenon that existed in the remote wilderness. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a theoretical physicist at Stanford University who specialized in studying temporal mechanics, became particularly interested in the Chen case. She analyzed the data that Robert and Kevin's instruments had recorded before their disappearance and concluded that the readings suggested the presence of what she called a temporal anomaly zone, an area where the normal flow of time was somehow disrupted. The data suggests that time itself moves differently in certain parts of the Lost Valley. Dr. Warren explained in a research paper she published about the case. If Robert and Kevin Chen encountered such an anomaly, they could theoretically be experiencing time at a different rate than the rest of the world. What feels like days to them could be years to us, or vice versa. This theory provided little comfort to Sarah Chen, who continued her desperate search for her missing family members. She established a foundation dedicated to finding Robert and Kevin and supporting other families dealing with unexplained disappearances in wilderness areas. The foundation funded research into temporal anomalies and supported search and rescue operations throughout the Pacific Northwest. As the years passed, the case of Robert and Kevin Chen gradually faded from public attention. Occasional expeditions were mounted to search the Lost Valley, but none yielded any new evidence about what had happened to the missing uncle and nephew. The area developed a reputation as being cursed or haunted, and most hikers avoided it entirely. It was not until the summer of 2023, exactly 4 years after Robert and Kevin's disappearance, that the impossible happened. On June 15th, 2023, the anniversary of their departure, a routine Forest Service patrol was conducting a survey of the Lost Valley when they encountered 2 men walking slowly along the main trail, appearing confused and disoriented. Ranger Tom Bradley was the first to spot the 2 figures emerging from the dense forest. At first, he assumed they were just ordinary hikers who had become lost. But as he approached them, he realized there was something very strange about their appearance. Both men looked much older than typical backpackers, with gray hair and deeply lined faces that spoke of decades of hard living. Their clothes were the same hiking gear that had been popular in 2019, but it appeared aged and weathered far beyond what 4 years of wear should have produced. When Ranger Bradley asked the men to identify themselves, the older of the 2 looked at him with confusion and said, "I'm Robert Chen, and this is my nephew, Kevin. We're conducting geological research in this area. What year is it?" The question sent a chill down Bradley's spine, and he immediately radioed for backup while trying to keep the 2 men calm. The man claiming to be Robert Chen appeared to be in his mid-60s, with silver hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes that hadn't been there in any of the photographs from 2019. The younger man, who said he was Kevin, looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, far older than the 19-year-old college student who had disappeared 4 years earlier. Both men seemed genuinely confused about the date and insisted that they had only been in the mountains for a few weeks. Within hours, the Lost Valley was swarming with law enforcement officers, medical personnel, and scientists eager to examine the 2 men who claimed to be Robert and Kevin Chen. DNA tests were immediately ordered to confirm their identities, while medical examinations were conducted to assess their physical and mental condition. Dr. Lisa Thompson, the emergency room physician who first examined the 2 men, was baffled by what she found. Both patients appear to be in good physical health, but they show signs of aging that are completely inconsistent with having been missing for only 4 years. She reported, the older man has the bone density and muscle mass of someone in his 60s, while the younger man shows physical development consistent with middle age. It's medically impossible. The DNA tests confirmed what seemed impossible. These were indeed Robert and Kevin Chen, the uncle and nephew who had disappeared 4 years earlier, but somehow, Robert had aged approximately 20 years during his 4-year absence, while Kevin had aged even more dramatically, transforming from a teenager into a middle-aged man. When questioned about their experiences during their disappearance, both Robert and Kevin provided accounts that were consistent with each other but completely at odds with the timeline of their absence. They insisted that they had been in the Lost Valley for approximately 20 years, during which time they had discovered and studied what Robert described as temporal distortion fields that caused time to move at different rates in different areas of the valley. According to their account, they had initially become lost while following unusual magnetic readings deeper into the valley than they had originally planned. They had discovered a series of caves and underground chambers where their instruments detected extreme temporal anomalies. While exploring these areas, they claimed to have experienced time moving at an accelerated rate, with days passing like hours and months flying by like weeks. Kevin, now appearing to be a man in his 40s, despite chronologically being only 23 years old, described the experience as being trapped in fast forward. He explained that they had tried repeatedly to leave the valley and return to civilization, but every time they attempted to exit the area, they found themselves somehow turned around and back where they started, as if the valley itself was preventing their departure. "We tried to leave hundreds of times," Kevin said during his debriefing with investigators, "but every trail led back to the center of the valley. It was like being trapped in a maze where all the exits led back to the beginning, and the whole time, we could feel time moving differently. We'd sleep for what felt like a normal night. But when we woke up, our beards had grown weeks' worth, and our bodies felt older." Robert, now appearing to be a man in his mid-60s, corroborated his nephew's account and provided additional details about the scientific phenomena they had observed during their extended captivity in the valley. He described discovering underground chambers filled with unusual crystalline formations that seemed to generate powerful electromagnetic fields. These fields, he theorized, were responsible for the temporal distortions they had experienced. The crystals in those caves were unlike anything in the geological literature. Robert explained to the team of scientists who debriefed him. They generated fields that seemed to accelerate the passage of time within their influence. We documented everything we could, but our equipment eventually failed after what felt like years of exposure to the anomalous conditions. The medical examinations of Robert and Kevin continued for weeks as doctors and scientists tried to understand how two men could age 20 years in the span of 4 calendar years. Blood tests, bone density scans, and neurological examinations all confirmed that both men had indeed experienced accelerated aging. Their bodies showed wear patterns, cellular damage, and physiological changes consistent with having lived through decades of normal time. Dr. Michael Foster, a geneticist brought in to study the case, found that Robert and Kevin's telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes that shorten with age, had shortened to levels consistent with their apparent ages rather than their chronological ages. At the cellular level, these men have aged exactly as much as they appear to have aged. Dr. Foster reported, whatever happened to them in that valley, it caused their bodies to experience the passage of time at an accelerated rate. The story of Robert and Kevin Chen's return made international headlines and attracted the attention of scientists from around the world. Theoretical physicists, temporal mechanics researchers, and experts in anomalous phenomena flocked to Washington State to study the case and investigate the Lost Valley where the impossible aging had allegedly occurred. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Stanford physicist who had theorized about temporal anomalies in the valley years earlier, was among the first scientists to interview Robert and Kevin upon their return. She found their accounts to be remarkably consistent and scientifically plausible, given the theoretical framework of temporal distortion fields. What Robert and Kevin describe is consistent with Einstein's theories of time dilation, but occurring under conditions that shouldn't be possible on Earth. Dr. Warren explained, if there truly are crystalline formations in that valley that can generate the kind of gravitational or electromagnetic fields they describe, then accelerated aging within those fields would be a predictable consequence. Attempts to return to the Lost Valley and investigate the caves and crystalline formations that Robert and Kevin described proved to be extraordinarily difficult. Multiple expeditions were organized, but each one encountered the same problems that had allegedly trapped the uncle and nephew for 20 years. Hikers reported becoming disoriented and lost, with GPS devices malfunctioning and compass readings becoming unreliable. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a geophysicist who led one of the first scientific expeditions back to the Lost Valley, reported experiencing some of the same temporal anomalies that Robert and Kevin had described. Our atomic clocks began showing irregular readings as soon as we entered the central part of the valley, she reported, and several members of our team reported feeling as though time was moving differently. Some felt like hours were passing in minutes, while others felt like minutes were stretching into hours. The expedition did locate what appeared to be the entrance to the cave system that Robert and Kevin had described, but attempts to explore the caves were hampered by equipment failures and the same disorienting effects that had trapped the uncle and nephew. After 3 team members became temporarily lost and were found hours later claiming that days had passed, the expedition was called off for safety reasons. The case of Robert and Kevin Chen raised profound questions about the nature of time and the possibility that certain locations on Earth might exist outside the normal flow of temporal reality. Their story challenged fundamental assumptions about physics and opened up new areas of scientific inquiry into the relationship between consciousness, time, and physical reality. For Sarah Chen, the return of her husband and nephew was both a miracle and a tragedy. While she was overjoyed to have them back alive, she struggled to accept that Robert was now 20 years older than when he had left, and that Kevin had missed his entire young adulthood. The family dynamics were forever changed, with Kevin now appearing older than his own father and Robert having aged into an elderly man virtually overnight. I got my family back, but they're not the same people who left 4 years ago, Sarah said in an interview months after their return. Robert has the memories and experiences of having lived through 20 additional years. Even though those years passed in just 4 calendar years, Kevin missed his entire 20s and early 30s. They're different people now, aged by experiences that the rest of us can barely comprehend. The psychological impact on Robert and Kevin was profound. Both men struggled with the reality that they had lost decades of their lives to the temporal anomaly in the Lost Valley. Kevin, in particular, found it difficult to adjust to being a middle-aged man when his memories told him he should still be a teenager. He had missed college, career development, relationships, and all the normal experiences of young adulthood. Robert, meanwhile, found that his accelerated aging had given him knowledge and insights that he struggled to explain or share with others. He claimed to have spent subjective decades studying the temporal anomalies in the valley and had developed theories about time and space that were far beyond current scientific understanding. However, without his equipment and documentation, which had been lost in the valley, he found it difficult to prove or communicate his discoveries. The Lost Valley was eventually declared off-limits to civilian access, with the Forest Service establishing a restricted zone around the area where Robert and Kevin had been trapped. Scientific research in the valley continued under strict safety protocols, but no expedition was allowed to stay in the area for more than a few hours at a time. Dr. Warren established a research foundation dedicated to studying temporal anomalies and their effects on human physiology. The foundation, funded in part by government grants and private donations, continued to investigate the Lost Valley and other locations around the world where similar phenomena had been reported. The case of Robert and Kevin Chen proves that our understanding of time and space is still incomplete. Dr. Warren said at a scientific conference dedicated to temporal mechanics, if such anomalies exist in nature, we need to understand them not just for scientific curiosity, but for the safety of anyone who might encounter them. The story of the uncle and nephew who aged 20 years in 4 calendar years became one of the most documented cases of temporal anomaly in scientific history. Their experience provided unprecedented insight into the effects of time dilation on human physiology and consciousness, while raising profound questions about the nature of reality itself. Years later, Robert and Kevin Chen continued to live with the consequences of their extraordinary experience. Robert, now appearing to be in his 70s despite being chronologically in his 50s, retired from his university position and dedicated his remaining years to writing about his experiences in the Lost Valley. Kevin, who appeared to be middle-aged despite being in his 20s, struggled to build a life and career appropriate to his apparent age rather than his chronological age. Their story serves as a reminder that the universe still holds mysteries that challenge our understanding of the fundamental laws of physics. The Lost Valley remains a restricted area, its secrets still largely hidden from human understanding, waiting for future generations of scientists to unlock the mysteries of time itself. The case of Robert and Kevin Chen stands as proof that sometimes reality can be stranger than any fiction, and that the boundaries between the possible and impossible are not as fixed as we might believe. Their 20-year journey through 4 calendar years opened a window into the deepest mysteries of time and space, forever changing our understanding of what it means to exist within the flow of temporal reality.